In space, there is no beginning and no end. But in one uncharted corner of our galaxy is a corridor to another world. A nexus where time and space collide. Past and future connect. And two generations will meet to join forces in a battle to save the universe.
I take it the odds are against us and the situation is grim.
You could say that.
Sounds like fun.
Care about weapons or power. He just cares about getting back to the Nexus.
The star is going to collapse in a matter of minutes.
That'll destroy everything in this system.
Population.
230 million, sir.
Why would he destroy a star? I have to stop him. But I can't do this alone. I need help.
I know someone who can.
You say history considers me dead. Who am I to argue with history?
You're a Starfleet officer. You have a duty.
I don't need to be lectured by you. I was out saving the galaxy when your grandfather was in diapers.
Now, the torch of adventure is about to be passed.
Eliminate them.
Klingon vessel decloaking directly ahead, sir.
Target their bridge!
Full disruptors!
Let's go!
Bridge! We have a new problem!
All right, let's move them out. Let's go. Take them out.
10 seconds to warp core breach.
All hands, brace for impact!
Let's try and cheat death together.
Warp 1, engage!
Star Trek Generations.
Rewatch Podcast presents the Star Trek Film Series Rewatch. Join us each week as we head into the final frontier aboard the Starship Enterprise. Send your thoughts to the Rewatch Podcast at gmail.com. Join us at our Facebook page, facebook.com/Rewatch Podcast, and follow us on Twitter at RewatchPod. Today we're discussing Star Trek Generations, starring Patrick Stewart, Jonathan Frakes, Brent Spiner, LeVar Burton, Michael Dorn, Gates McFadden, Marina Sirtis, Malcolm McDowell, Whoopi Goldberg, Alan Ruck, James Doohan, Walter Koenig, and William Shatner, directed by David Carson. Welcome back to the Star Trek Film Series Rewatch. I'm Cory, and you precious little life forms, where are you?
And this is Nathan, and the clown can stay, but the Ferengi in the gorilla suit has to go.
Well, how you doing, Nathan?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm fantastic.
Good to be into the what feels like the second half of the Star Trek rewatch. We've gone through original series, and now we're landing in TV land, like the Next Generation and that crew. So it should be interesting.
Yes, very much looking forward to getting into this. So, do you have any history with Star Trek Generations?
Well, I mean, the film came out in 1994. I wouldn't necessarily say I have a big history with it as far as when it actually came out at the theaters. I think I saw this on like video or DVD, kind of probably when I was going through my Star Trek Star Trek The Next Generation watch, probably when I was 19, 20. That's kind of when I kind of got into Star Trek like fully, so I probably discovered this film give or take around then.
And as for me, I'm sure I'd seen at least one of the Next Generation movies. I'll talk about that one when we get to it. But this one I only watched after I did my big rewatch of TNG this year. So that was the first time I'd seen it. And it was kind of good, doing a whole series rewatch and then going straight into the movies. And it works nicely too, because these movies, of course, were made after TNG had finished.
I think TNG had just finished, like it was 94, 87. So yeah, it just finished its 7th season. And then about 6 months later, the movie debuted.
And debatably, the series finale of TNG was its own movie. Like, it was a big 2-part episode. It was like 2 hours, big grand thing. So even that in itself was kind of a movie. So you can see it had potential to get into movies.
Something that I'm kind of enjoying at the moment is, and I've bought a few of them actually, like with the big Blu-ray release of Next Generation that they kind of did probably over the last, couple of years, they actually went to the trouble of re-editing a few episodes, namely the cliffhangers that would connect season 3 and season 4 or whatever it might have been, and they've actually created what feels like 2 or 3 Star Trek Next Generation movies. So I think there's one called Unification. There's another one called The Best of Both Worlds, and like they've turned the best 2-parters into a single movie, and it works great. It's really good.
I guess I'll get into a synopsis for Star Trek Generations.
Sounds good.
It is the late 23rd century. Retired Starfleet officers James T. Kirk, Montgomery Scott, and Pavel Chekhov are guests of honor aboard the newly christened Enterprise B. However, a test run takes an unexpected turn when the starship encounters 2 vessels trapped inside a mysterious energy ribbon, and during a perilous rescue attempt, Kirk is swept out into space. 78 years later, Captain Jean-Luc Picard and the crew of the Enterprise D rescue an alluring scientist named Tolian Soren. Unbeknownst to Picard, Soren harbors a deadly plan that includes the destruction of the Enterprise and millions of lives. He is attempting to return to the ribbon, which is explained by 10-forward bartender Guinan to be the doorway to the Nexus, a place of unbridled joy. Soren destroys several neutron stars to force the ribbon to pass through an uninhabited planet, sweeping him up along with Picard, following the destruction of the Enterprise D, its crew, and all the surrounding planets. In the Nexus, Picard finds himself with a beautiful family, but his joy is short-lived when he is visited by Guinan, who sends him to find Captain Kirk and a way out. Arriving back before the ribbon arrives, Picard and Kirk stop Soren before his plan can be enacted, but Kirk falls to his death. The Enterprise is unable to be salvaged, but casualties were relatively light, and Picard and Riker speculate on a new ship named Enterprise. There's also several subplots too, including Picard's brother and nephew being burned to death, Data activating his emotion ship, Worf being promoted, and Geordi being used by Klingon spies, but we're going to get to those.
We will get to those, but I actually quite like all those little subplots.
Some of them are sort of linked to the main story, but that synopsis was the main crux of the plot.
Yeah, I kind of get the impression a lot of those subplots were created simply to kind of give people things to do.
Yeah, it's funny that that's the way this movie is, because we often say that in those earlier Star Trek films that like a lot of the side characters didn't have a lot to do, like Sulu and Uhura. So
I think you could argue too, I mean, with Next Generation in particular, I mean, I think look at the fact that it's kind of Genesis is from 7 seasons of 22 episodes a season, or 24 or whatever it was episodes a season. I mean, that's a lot of TV, so it's very much an ensemble cast. I mean, I would argue that Generations has never really been about purely the commander of the starship, where original series always seemed to focus more on Kirk, McCoy, and Spock. They were the big 3. They essentially drove the story. They kind of went on the adventures, and the rest of them were kind of supporting characters, where Next Generation doesn't really work like that, in my opinion. So, you might think differently, but they tend to give them all things to do. They've all got a reason to be there. It feels much more like a team.
Yeah, definitely. This movie had a later year release. This came out on November 18th of 94 as well. And it did like really well in its, initial gross. Like it did huge numbers. It was like $23.1 million during its opening weekend. It went on to earn another $75.6 million, and then another $42.4 worldwide. So, you're talking about nearly $120 million on a $35 million budget, and that's pretty awesome. And it even did like massively well in Japan, even though the TV show itself was considered quite poor performing in the Japanese market. So, yeah, in all markets, it kind of hit everything.
Yeah, it did pretty well, didn't it? I mean, I think a lot of that has to be for, next gen's kind of broad appeal, because that was a big show. I mean, it was a very popular, well syndicated, all over the world TV show. So I'm not surprised it did so well worldwide, because I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but just kind of going by what we've spoken about in the shows, like the previous films never really did all that well worldwide. It was very much a US thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It was one of those things where, sci-fi is a difficult market to hit. So, Star Trek did pretty well because it had the basis of the TV series. So when it gets into movies, it's recognizable and people are like, oh, yeah, I like that TV show. I'll go and see it, Whereas more original sci-fi movies were a bit harder to target in that time period. Of course, today, sci-fi does very well at the cinemas, especially if they put a decent budget into the effects. So,
well, just look at I think a good example is the more recent Star Trek films, which we'll obviously talk about more as, the series kind of goes on. But, they're big films. Into Darkness did pretty well, and I'm pretty sure the first Star Trek before that was very popular as well.
Yeah, exactly. And then there was even a novelization of this film, and that was written by a man named J.M. Dillard. And that even spent 3 weeks in the New York Times bestseller. So going beyond the movie, it does terrifically well in the literary market.
Oh, definitely. And this is one of the first films to really take advantage of different kind of markets to kind of cross-promote and whatnot. There was even several kind of tie-in video games that were released to coincide with the film's release. They included a PC game. Granted, it was kind of released a few years after, but it was still kind of voiced by all the same actors. It even, and this is a kind of something that I kind of found quite interesting, is that this was one of the first films to actually have a website attached to it that you could kind of access, like the trailer and various kind of other kind of bits of trivia and information. This is in 1994, back when like the internet was like this very young kind of thing. It hadn't really evolved into the beast that we kind of know it to be today. And so the idea of doing a website was actually quite unique and interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting that all this stuff is coming in now, because we're talking 1994 and, the few years after it as well, where things like PC games were really taking off. And then, of course, you've got things like Sega, Nintendo 64. All these sort of things are really coming around at this time. So it's cool that Star Trek is sort of getting involved in these multimedia platforms.
Yeah, no, it's pretty interesting, isn't it? Another bit of trivia regarding this film is the producers actually asked George Takei to come back and play Sulu one more time and take the helm of the Enterprise B, but Takei actually refused, because if Sulu had taken the helm, it would have meant temporarily reducing Sulu's rank so that he could serve under Captain Kirk once again. He actually felt that Sulu had worked too hard to earn his command to allow even a temporary reduction. A new character, Demora, which is the daughter of Sulu, was created to speak Sulu's lines.
Yeah, that's a good call, I think, because I think we were talking last episode about how George Takei went on to cameo as Captain Sulu.
I don't think it would have been impossible to have him there. I don't think it was necessarily needed for him to serve under Captain Kirk, but for him to be honoured as one of the original crew, they probably could have wrote him in a different kind of manner, and so you probably still could have had his daughter there. One of the lines in the film, and we'll go into this a bit later on, but one of the lines is Captain Kirk actually whispers to, I think it's Chekhov, when he goes, well, when did Sulu find the time to have children, And it's kind of true. It is a bit of a strange kind of subplot, but, as I say, you just accept these things and move on. It's kind of nice that he had a family. It meant that he was happy outside of the Enterprise, so that's good.
He progressed in his career. He had a nice family. It was a cool little thing, even if we didn't see him.
Another piece of trivia is William Shatner has stated that the line, "Who am I to argue with the captain of the Enterprise?" was the hardest line he had ever had to deliver.
I can understand.
Just quickly, did you like my delivery then?
Oh, yeah.
I tried to kind of get into scene and into the moment, to the character's head for a moment.
I think our fan Dewey Lindley might have something to say about it.
Nice.
Furthermore, the entire original cast was supposed to be in the film.
Yes.
But only the three members, of course, Shatner, James Doohan, and Walter Koenig actually did come back. Yeah, it seems that everybody else was just kind of not interested in revisiting. They said their farewells in the last movie.
I kind of Spock was meant to be in this too, but Nimoy, who was actually offered the job of also directing the film, felt that there were story problems with the script and that Spock's role simply wasn't needed. I said to everybody concerned that if you took the dozen or so lines of Spock dialogue and simply changed the name of the character, nobody would notice the difference. Nimoy and Kelly's lines were actually modified to give to Doohan and Koenig. I do think it's a bit disappointing that Spock wasn't there, but yeah, you're right. I mean, the Undiscovered Country was a pretty fitting send-off, and not too sure if it was entirely necessary for everyone to be on the starship. It would have been a bit odd, I think.
And I can understand why they would offer it to Leonard Nimoy. Of course, he's directed two Star Trek films before this, and he had appeared in TNG, so he was familiar with the cast as well.
I don't quite understand why he would have turned it down, though. I'm a bit confused by that because, we've spoken about this before. He directed Search of Spock, Voyage Home, and then he didn't make another Star Trek film, directed one, Then he made, I think, Three Men and a Baby, and he didn't really do much after that. This would have been a good opportunity to see what Leonard Nimoy had up his sleeve as far as directing was concerned, because after Voyage Home, he was getting quite interesting. It would have been interesting to see how he would have approached it.
Furthermore, it was Berman who actually felt that having the whole original cast in the movie would sort of work as a good bridge. Yeah. Between the two, as like a passing of the baton, as it were. But I think just having the three there was probably even too much in itself. I think just having Kirk in it would have been fine. I'm not even sure you'd necessarily need him, but I can understand what they were doing. You'd had so many crossovers in TNG. Of course, DeForest Kelley had appeared, Leonard Nimoy, and James Doohan.
Yep.
So I guess this, that would be the ultimate of the crossover. The two captains of the Enterprise appearing together. Scotty and Chekhov being there was a little whatever.
It was a little whatever. They didn't really do all that much. But to be fair, the sequence is quite a meaty sequence, and it's not like it's like a 2-minute kind of cameo. They're in the first 20 minutes of this movie. It's almost like a short. Well, it is. It's like a short film almost at the start of this movie before it kind of transitions to the next gen. But we'll get to that. As I said, we've spoken about the original series, but DeForest Kelley was all set to appear in this film, but due to his declining health, he could not get on-set insurance, which was a union requirement for anyone on a film set at the time. His lines were given to Walter Koenig as Chekhov.
And of course, this is the first film to be produced after the death of Gene Roddenberry. We were talking last week about how he managed to see a rough cut of the Undiscovered Country, but this was the first time they had gone ahead with a film after his death.
Yeah, another thing as well is 50 days before shooting began, the captain's chair on the bridge was stolen. A new one had to be used. One made of fiberglass around foam and an old first season frame. It's interesting. It was some random person stole the chair, which is a bit strange.
It's probably because, TNG was wrapping up, the show was ending, and they just thought, I'll take this little souvenir, They probably packed down the set a little bit, and whoever stole it probably didn't think anybody would notice.
This is interesting as well. Kirk's death scenes were reshot after preview audiences reacted badly to the original version, wanting a more heroic death. Kirk actually originally died after being shot in the back by Soren. Paramount actually spent an extra $5 million, which is 1/6 of the film's budget, to reshoot Captain James T. Kirk's demise.
$5 million just to do those reshoots.
I haven't checked it out, but I did read today as well that apparently you can see those scenes as a deleted scene on the DVD, which would be kind of interesting to check out. So I should fire up the Blu-ray and have a look at the deleted scenes. I haven't done that yet, to be honest with you.
And of course, Star Trek has a massive fandom out there, but some of the more obsessive fans actually sent Malcolm McDowell death threats, believing that he had caused the death of Captain Kirk, which is stupid. He's an actor. He didn't actually. Kirk is a fictitious character. Like,
Yeah, I know.
How can people get so obsessive about stuff?
He's
like
not.
that?
He's not real, is he?
I know. I hear stories like that to this day. Do you watch The Walking Dead?
No, I don't actually.
Oh well, there was a little girl in that show that did some like pretty bad stuff.
Yeah.
Like she was a bit cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, and she's a little girl, and she got death threats. From fandom, and he's like, "Shut up! It's a fake thing. It's not real."
Is it really? It's not that different from like Joffrey from Game of Thrones getting death threats because he was such a awful character. But
yeah,
I mean, from what I understand, Joffrey actually doesn't really act anymore. I don't think he does anything. I think he's.
I know he went off to like university or something. He said he's just going to give the acting thing a rest.
Yeah, that's right. After the Game of Thrones, and I suppose from his point of view, it's probably not a bad note to end on.
Yeah, it's crazy though, isn't it?
Yeah,
How people can just react like that. It's to a fictional character's death.
Whilst we're talking about it, what did you think of Malcolm McDowell as the main bad guy in this film?
Oh, he does a pretty good job. I'll watch Malcolm McDowell in anything.
Do you like him as an actor?
Oh yeah,
yeah, he's good, isn't he?
Yeah, well, we'll get to Malcolm McDowell. So let's get into our main discussion of the film.
Yeah, cool.
You know, the movie opens with a champagne bottle, which is it's a bit different.
I actually didn't realize it until about probably 2 minutes into the opening sequence, and then it finally dawned on me that this thing floating through space was a bloody champagne bottle. And I actually said out loud, I said, "What is that? What's going on here? I don't remember this at all."
Yeah, and I think for anybody who hasn't watched Star Trek to this point, it'd be lost on them what's going on.
Yeah.
Because this is the first appearance of the Enterprise B. We'd never seen it before. We'd seen, of course, the original and the A, and then TNG, they're on board the D, and then in a time travel-y episode of TNG, we'd seen the C. So we'd never seen the B before.
It's interesting, isn't it?
So, when it opens with the champagne bottle flying through space, people would be like, what the hell's going on here? And then to have it be revealed that it was a christening of the B before it takes its first trip out of space dock. You can understand, but I guess like the lay person wouldn't understand the impact of such a revelation.
No, they wouldn't. And you're right, it's a bit of a strange way to open the film. I mean, it's not the most, well, I suppose it kind of keeps you guessing, but it's not the most dramatic way of kind of doing things, is it? But that's okay. As I said, you just kind of accept it. So the champagne bottle flies through space, hits the side of the Enterprise, and everyone cheers. Hooray! Enterprise B is open for business. And then the doors open, and isn't there like a throng of like journalists?
Yeah.
and they're trying to like get to Chekhov, Shatner, and Scotty, and they're coming through the door trying to like bombard them with questions and whatnot. And Kirk, who actually looks a little uncomfortable, I think he's happy to be there, but you can tell that he's a little bit, I don't know, like he's a bit over it almost.
It's quite funny that like all the press is clamoring to speak to Kirk, and they really just do not care about the actual captain of the Enterprise B, who's right there. And randomly, it's Alan Ruck.
I know.
Who, of course, is Cameron.
Yes.
In Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
I like Cameron from Ferris Bueller, but I think it's a bit of an odd choice to have him as Captain John Harriman, captain of the Enterprise B. Let me just say, I'm pretty sure he's the worst captain of the Enterprise, because this guy does not have a good leadership style.
No, not at all. He was definitely not prepared for captaining the Enterprise.
I mean, you can only assume that the Enterprise B would be this big prestigious thing. I would imagine that Starfleet would have kind of got together and they would have found like the best people to be on that ship. I mean, it is the flagship of the fleet. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So I'm surprised that they found this guy who can't make a decision, and clearly can't make a decision as soon as the first kind of moment of distress kind of appears.
To start with, you can sort of look at it as if he doesn't have his full crew there. He doesn't have his number one with him. He sort of has Sulu's daughter there, But, he doesn't have like a tight-knit team of people that he can conference with. So when, shit starts hitting the fan, he's sort of like trying to come up with things himself. It's not like Kirk, who would turn to Bones or Spock or someone like that and get opinions.
Yes.
Even, in TNG, Picard would often have meetings with Worf and Riker and everybody to sort of get everyone's opinion so he can make an informed decision. So you can see how he was just getting overwhelmed with everything. And of course, Kirk is coming in. I think he's very reluctant to sort of take any charge, but he sort of gives his 2 cents. And then, of course, the inevitable Captain Kirk, will you take the helm? We need you.
That's exactly. Well, speaking of reliable people on the ship of the Enterprise B, the science officer is actually this woman named Jeanette Goldstein. Now, do you know who that is, Cory?
No.
Jeanette Goldstein is she was in Aliens. She played Vasquez.
Okay.
Do you know who I mean?
Yeah, she was the hard-ass woman.
She was the hard-ass woman, the really, like the all balls. Excuse my language, but you know what I mean? Like she's super tough. Nothing's going to get her. And she's really memorable in Aliens. Like she's like one of those characters that you're like kind of think about it. There's actually a podcast out there called I Was in This Too, and it's this podcast where they actually interview actors who were in famous films but they're not really famous.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean, and they interviewed Jeanette Goldstein for being in Aliens, and it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I just remember Bill Paxton walking up to her and going, "Hey Vasquez, have you ever been mistaken for a man?" And she says, "No, have you?"
Yeah, that's right. So
I didn't realize that was her.
Yeah. I did a bit of a pause on the TV when I watched it yesterday and said, "Is that who I think it is?" And then I remembered it's Vasquez from Aliens. So pause if you're watching it and check that out.
But of course, the other 2 members of the crew, you got Chekhov and Scotty there, and immediately they're on it as well.
I did think it was kind of odd though, and that Captain Harriman suddenly kind of succumbed so quickly and handed the reins back to Kirk. I mean, I actually felt like that was a bit of a cheap story moment. It just didn't really gel with me very well.
Yeah, but the look of glee in Shatner's eyes.
and doesn't like Shatner, he kind of gets out of his seat and he's like staring at the crew and you could tell that he wants to get involved, but he can't,
Yeah, and it's great. Like, he does his thing, this energy ribbon trapped to Starfleet vessels, and they need to get them out. So the Enterprise B is nowhere near ready to mount a rescue. It's got nothing. It's got no tractor beams. It's got no crew. Everything's arriving on Tuesday.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. which is meant to be a big gag, but it kind of just gets a bit irritating, yeah?
Yeah, and I like the little touch where he says, "Oh, we're just taking a trip out to Pluto, a trip around the block."
Yeah.
And, of course, as far as we know, Pluto is the furthest planet that we're aware of. I mean, there's a couple of things we've discovered over the last few years, but like Pluto is like way, way, way out. And to them, that's the trip around the block, is to the furthest planet that we currently know about.
So the Enterprise gets sent on this rescue mission to save 2 ships from a strange energy ribbon. And during the actual rescue, I think one of the ships blows up, and the second ship, Scotty, is in the process of beaming all 230 or whatever it is out of there, and he only gets 40 of them. Yeah, so obviously that's a bit sad, but I think the Enterprise takes some damage during that period, and Kirk actually goes to the deflector control to actually alter some part of the ship to actually get it back in action. And if I remember rightly, the Captain Harriman actually volunteers. He goes, no, I'll go and do it. I'll run down and fix this up. And Kirk actually goes, no, it's your ship. You stay on the bridge. I'll go and do it.
Well, I thought that was the great turn, because as much as you saw the glee in his eyes to be back in command, he goes to sit in the chair and realizes, this isn't my chair. This isn't my ship. You, as the captain, stay here. I am going to go and take care of this. And it leads to his demise.
That's right.
Supposed demise.
Because he just disappears, doesn't he? And then Scotty goes downstairs and he gets, you better get Chekhov down here now. And they all go down, and then they see that there's a lot of damage. I think this part of the ship is missing. Aren't they staring into space? And Chekhov says to Scotty, was anyone down here? And Scotty goes, yes, Yes, there was. And that's it. That's all you hear. And then I think it cuts at that point, and we go to the Next Generation crew on what appears to be a ship.
On the holodeck.
That's right. But you don't know it's the holodeck, but you assume it's the holodeck.
It was weird that they bring out Worf in chains.
Yeah.
Because they try to do this setup thing as if he's being court-martialed or something, and then they promote him.
Yeah, I know.
And I was like, why did they go through this elaborate in-chains thing?
Yeah, I don't know.
Like, was it some sort of college hazing or something? I don't know. It was just weird.
I kind of find it weird that we've kind of been watching Next Gen for 7 seasons and we've never seen anything like that before. But you're right, they kind of go through this big ruse and there's a lot of skylarking and mucking around and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, Worf actually gets promoted to whatever rank.
I thought it was a funny moment where he has to walk the plank, but he manages to get by the test or something. It was like some sort of, again, like some sort of hazing thing.
Yeah.
But he manages to succeed. So Riker says, computer, remove the plank. So it disappears. He falls in the water. And Picard says, I think you meant retracted the plank.
That's
and
right.
Like, oh, God.
Apparently,
whoops.
in the production of this film, Michael Dorn had a meeting with Rick Berman and whoever else was in control about that scene, a 2-hour meeting, because he just didn't understand how that was funny. Apparently, anytime like Worf's kind of character is kind of pulled into question, or they're making fun of him, or he kind of gets a little defensive about it because he doesn't understand. Because Worf clearly wouldn't enjoy that. He would be embarrassed by it. He wouldn't see the humor in it at all, and he wouldn't like everybody laughing at him. So I think Michael Dorn as an actor was actually quite uncomfortable with the rest of the crew and the writers in particular making fun of Worf, which he didn't enjoy at all.
And then we set up Data's subplot of him not understanding humor, and he pushes Dr. Crusher in the water because he couldn't understand why Worf falling in the water was funny. So when he does it to Dr. Crusher, it's not funny. And he kind of gets frustrated with that a little bit later.
So that's where kind of Data's story starts with his emotion chip, and we'll get to that, but that's okay. So exactly. that scene is actually interrupted by what appears to be a transmission for our captain, Jean-Luc Picard, who is amazing. He's one of the best captains of them all. So he actually says, fine, just patch it through to the holodeck. I'd like to take it down here. He takes it on the holodeck, and you can tell instantly that his demeanor shifts. Straight away, he storms off the deck and he's instantly in a bad mood. He's got some bad news, but they don't tell you what.
Exactly, because then that is interrupted by them having to go and help this science station. Even though he's obviously had some terrible news, he is forced to go and take care of the mission at hand. He's still the captain of the Enterprise.
He's such a good captain, isn't he? Like, he exudes a lot of power and respect. And even that sequence, which I actually thought was quite a good sequence of directly after he receives the news and he walks onto the bridge and he gives the orders to Riker, and then Riker starts questioning a little bit. And actually, Picard yells at him, doesn't he? And he goes, just do it! Just get on with it! And storms off into his ready room and just hides away for the next however long, And everyone can tell that something's up with him.
So they're heading off to this distress call from what is an observatory, I think.
It's a little unclear. An observatory in orbit of the star Amargosa.
And they go over, I think it's Riker, Geordi, Data, and they go over to investigate, and pretty much everyone's dead, but they find Dr. Tolian Soren, who we had seen at the beginning. He was one of the people rescued from the ship trapped in the ribbon. And it turns out that he is not human. He's Elorian.
And he's hundreds of years old, isn't he?
Yes. So he was having a bit of a mini freak out back on the Enterprise B about wanting to go back to the ribbon. So immediately, something's afoot.
So the android Data and engineer Geordi LaForge, they actually discover a compound called trilithium in a hidden room of the observatory. When they actually discover this hidden room, which they weren't meant to find, Soren actually appears and knocks LaForge unconscious and launches a trilithium solar probe at Armagosa.
Again, this is like Data's subplot playing into it because he put the emotion chip in. This was something that was set up in the series that his creator had built and given to his brother at one point. Or it was meant for him and his brother stole it.
Isn't his brother called Law? Is that right?
Law, that's right.
Yeah.
And he managed to get it back. So I guess at some point, because it was damaged, that's why he never put it in. So I guess at some point he managed to fix it and had decided to put it in. So when they're on the ship, he's sort of, he's getting jokes that were told several years ago.
Yeah, that's right.
And he's absolutely cracking up. And then when Soren comes in, he is paralyzed with fear.
Hey, just quickly, just going back for 1 second, I've got to say though, Brent Spiner, the actor that plays Data, he's quite a good actor. The way he kind of portrays it, he's very convincing.
Yeah, I think so. He does a really good job with it.
He does a really good job with it, and it wouldn't be that easy to do to kind of get into character like that, but he's really quite good at it, I think.
Moving forward, he launches that trilithium, and then Klingons come down, and it's the Duras sisters, which were another carryover from the TV show. They were kind of involved in trying to get someone elected to the Klingon presidency.
Yep.
And the Enterprise crew, particularly Picard, had sort of backed somebody else, and things had worked out. There was all kinds of murder. It's a rabbit hole that we don't want to go into because it's the series. But they were kind of a holdover. They had sort of taken off and sort of separated themselves from the Klingon Empire, so they were kind of rogue.
I kind of thought that they were from the TV show. I thought they looked familiar. I mean, I'm sure I've seen you two before, and you're dead right. And now that you kind of mentioned that episode about the Klingon Empire and some vote for the presidency or something, that does ring a bell.
It turns out that they had stolen the trilithium from a group of Romulans, and that is why the observatory was attacked, because the Romulans showed up trying to get it back.
Yeah,
from Soren. Yeah, so he blows up this, whatever it was a star or a neutron star or whatever it was, and he takes off with the Duras sisters, and he really takes no shit from them.
No, he doesn't.
I thought it was crazy. Usually you see human beings interacting with Klingons, they're pretty much taken prisoner. Klingons are pretty ruthless.
Yep.
And the Duras sisters especially. But when he comes on board, they sort of drag him over as if he's some sort of annoyance, and he immediately punches one of them in the face.
Yeah, I know.
And she even sort of leans in and she wipes that blood on his lip, and she goes, "I hope for your sake you're initiating some sort of mating ritual."
That's right. It's quite good.
But it shows you what a ruthless person Soren is. He's not even afraid of the Klingons.
No, you're dead right. And they absolutely take no shit whatsoever from them, and they're actually quite good characters. I'm quite pleased that they chose them, because they're very memorable. So the plot actually thickens a little bit, because it actually turns out that Guinan, the bartender who we all know and love as Whoopi Goldberg, has a bit of a history with Soren, and she understands what the wave is all about, and the concept of the Nexus and where it is and why you'd want to go there. And I think if I remember rightly, they're kind of in 10 forward, and Guinan kind of sees Soren and kind of looks at him and goes, "You look really familiar," and then it kind of dawns on her where she kind of remembers him from. Why she doesn't go directly to Picard and Riker is beyond me. As soon as she realised that this guy's bad news, she should have just gone to them and sort of said, "This guy's terrible, get him out of here." But no, Picard and Riker had to discover for themselves, didn't they?
And they have to also discover that Guinan was there on the day that Soren was saved from the Nexus.
The energy ribbon that destroyed that ship was not just some random phenomena traveling through the universe. It's a doorway to another place that we call the Nexus. And it's a place I've tried very, very hard to forget.
What happened to you?
It was like being inside joy. As if joy was something tangible and you could Wrap yourself up in it like a blanket. And never in my entire life have I ever been as content.
And you were beamed away from there.
Pulled. Ripped away. None of us wanted to go. And I would have done anything to get back there. And once I realized that wasn't possible, I learned to live with that.
What about Soren?
If he's still obsessed, he could be a very, very dangerous man.
Why would he destroy a star? Thank you, Gannon.
If you go, you're not gonna care about anything. Not the ship, not Soren, not me, nothing. All you'll want is to stay in the Nexus. And you're not gonna want to come back.
So they have to go to her.
So we actually didn't really explain that very well, but Guinan was actually in the first timeline with the original crew and Commander Harriman when the two ships are being rescued by the Enterprise B and Scotty beams 40 people over the board. One of them is Guinan,
which makes sense. You know, in the series there was an episode where they traveled way back in time to like the early years of America being founded. And she was there then as well. So she is like untold hundreds of years old herself.
She's pretty cool, man. I always quite like Guinan.
Yeah, and she's probably older than Soren.
So it turns out that Guinan actually explains that Soren is obsessed with re-entering the Nexus, which is a extra-dimensional realm which allows those who enter to experience their pasts over again, whenever and however they choose, to ultimately an unending ecstasy. So yeah, man, it's a place that you want to be, yeah?
You know, it goes on that trying to figure out what Soren's plan is. Why did he have to destroy the neutron star? And he finds out the ribbon's course had been altered slightly because of the star's gravitational pull no longer existing. So he figures out that they are headed to a planet called Viridian 3, and that if he manages to destroy the Viridian system's neutron star, then the ribbon will pass straight through Viridian 3 and he'll be swept up in it, because he has figured that he can't just fly a ship into it because the ship has always been destroyed.
That's right. That's exactly it. So as soon as he kind of discovers this, Picard and the Enterprise crew, their top priority is to kind of find Soren and to stop him kind of, unleashing this never-ending hell that he's kind of, putting on everyone. Because that's what I was kind of saying before about Malcolm McDowell. I mean, I actually think he's a pretty good bad guy in this. I mean, without kind of giving too much away about the ending, I think the ending kind of falls over a little bit for me personally. But as an actor and a bad guy, he's pretty memorable.
So he's down on Viridian 3, and on the Enterprise, they managed to get in contact with the Duras sisters. And they're like, well, he's not here anymore. He's down on the planet. They've got Geordi LaForge hostage from the station, and they make a weird deal with Picard, because he's like, you can have me as your prisoner. We'll do a prisoner exchange. You take me, you give us LaForge back, right?
Yeah.
But first, you have to send me down to the planet to speak with Soren. What was their plan? Like, to actually, let him go, ostensibly? Like, I don't know. It's just a weird plan. Like, they weren't directly getting him back.
No.
But they released Geordi anyway.
Yeah, I know, which just felt a bit strange. And anyway, I mean, from a plot perspective, you've got to get Geordi back, and he needs to find Soren, so they've worked out a way to do it, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. Because Soren has sort of paid off the Duras sisters by giving them a way to spy on the Enterprise. And that is that he sort of configured this mechanism to send all the information from Geordi's visor back to them so they can see all their Starship plans or whatever.
So their big plan is for Geordi to get to engineering and for him to look at one of the consoles that actually tells the Klingon ship what the shield modulation is. So he looks at the console and they go, right, that's it. Shield modulation is whatever it is, and they adjust their weapons to that modulation and they attack the Enterprise without any damage to them.
They really put that off for a long time as well, because Picard's down on Viridian 3 talking to Soren, and they're having this whole back and forth because Picard can't get into this missile that he's made, this trilithium missile, because he's put a big force shield around it. So he's just chatting away with Soren for a long time. And in the meantime, they sort of need to put off Geordi sending the appropriate information back. So there's just this weird sequence where they're like, I think he's the only engineer in Starfleet that never goes down to engineering, you know?
Yeah, that's
and
right.
then cut back to Picard again and let that go on for a bit more. So it sort of just it saunters along for a little bit there.
You know, there was a time when I wouldn't hurt a fly. Then the Borg came. And they showed me that if there is one constant in this whole universe, it's death. Afterwards, I began to realize it didn't really matter. We're all gonna die sometime, just a question of how and when. You will too, Captain. Aren't you beginning to feel time gaining on you? It's like a predator. It's stalking you. Oh, you can try and outrun it with doctors, medicines, new technologies. But in the end, time is going to hunt you down and make the kill.
It's our mortality that defines us, Sorin. It's part of the truth of our existence.
What if I told you I found a new truth?
The Nexus?
Time has no meaning there. The predator has no teeth.
Yeah, I really do find the second half of this film to be a little lacking. Like all the stuff down on Viridian 3 with Picard and Soren just feels a little flat and not very dramatic. I know they're trying to make it dramatic by having the force field around Soren and Picard not being able to get in, and then he finds this way in through this little gap in a rock and does all that kind of stuff, but it just doesn't carry much weight to it. Like there's not much tension there, is there?
Yeah, exactly. And you know what's going to happen. You know they're going to end up in the Nexus, because just a little bit earlier they had this whole subplot about how Picard's brother Robert and his nephew Rene were killed in some sort of fire.
And that's what the transmission is about, that he found out on the holodeck.
Yeah, which I think is a bit rough, really, because there was an episode in TNG where Picard went to visit his brother.
I remember that episode, and he's a cranky old man, isn't he? And they argue endlessly.
Yeah, his brother had stayed in France and got into the family wine business. And when Picard shows up to see his brother, he didn't even know that his brother had gotten married.
Yeah.
And had a son, Rene. And it was a great setup that, you know, Picard and his brother had this animosity. They actually physically fought at one point. Like they got into a fist fight.
I know, I remember
to sort of like hash out their problems with each other. And then there was the problem that Robert had with Rene, was that Rene was really interested in what Picard did and was actually kind of interested in going to Starfleet. So when it comes around that they both died in this fire, you're just like, well, that's just, you've thrown that away, man. Like that is like super rough for him. And then of course the fact that he never had a family himself. And Patrick Stewart, he's a tremendous actor and he gives it his all, you know, when he breaks down with Counselor Troy.
Yeah.
Like that was it was a good scene. It was well acted, but just the fact that was where they went with the story, I was just like, man, that's dark.
And you're right though, apart from like adding a bit of a character moment for Picard, it doesn't really add to the overall story, does it? It doesn't.
No.
It doesn't add anything to the Soren story or the Klingon story or whatever it might be. They're purely character moments in the same way that the emotion ship is just a character moment for Data.
Exactly. So, when Soren is successful and they end up in the Nexus, at the same time the Duras sisters attack the Enterprise.
That's right.
And they manage to separate the saucer section.
The Enterprise actually finds a way to shoot at the Klingon ship, and it actually ends up destroying it. And but before that actually happened, the engineering had been damaged, and there's been some damage to the warp, something, and they all had to get out of there pretty quickly.
Yeah, so they managed to separate from it, but it explodes and they crash onto Viridian 3.
I actually think it's a pretty good sequence, the crash onto Viridian 3, because it's something new that I don't really recall seeing before. Like, maybe they did crash the ship on the show. They may have done it. I just can't think of it off the top of my head. But in the movies, like it's a pretty dramatic sequence, isn't it?
It is. And you think, well, they managed to get away in the saucer section and it crashed, but, they're all right. They're all fine. But then Soren successfully blows up the neutron star, destroying the planet in the process. Like, that was the whole thing, was that by him destroying that neutron star, yes, Viridian 3 was uninhabited, but the nearby planets were all inhabited with hundreds of millions of people, and all of them were destroyed. So the ribbon comes through, whisks up Soren and Picard.
Not Shatner, yeah, Picard and Soren, yep.
The whole planet is destroyed and everybody is dead. And that's when we get into the main part of being in the Nexus. And Picard has a family and everything.
Which kind of comes across as like a scene from a Dickens film almost. You know what I mean? Like it's that kind of like a Christmas story and whatnot. So like it's a fine sequence. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's just, it's Picard kind of living out his fantasy, which is, 5 kids and a wife kind of thing,
Yeah, and Renee is actually his son, not his nephew.
That's right. So, and then Guinan actually interrupts Picard in the Nexus because she exists both at the Nexus and back at the Enterprise. Don't ask me how. They don't really explain it. It's
hand wavy.
Yeah, you just accept it. But Guinan shows up and tells Picard to be careful, that this is where all your dreams can come true. Unimaginable joy can come in here, but you have control. And I think, doesn't Picard actually say to Guinan, can you actually leave? And she said, of course you can leave. You can choose to leave. You can go to anywhere you want. But before they do that, she actually says there's someone that you should meet. And they go off to see Captain James Tiberius Kirk.
Yeah, and he is on a property, an estate that he used to own but had sold. And this is apparently a time when he had left Starfleet, but he was going to go back. He had, I guess, some like a girlfriend called Antonia, and she left him after she found that he was going back to Starfleet. So this was probably at a time between one of the movies at some point, because he says this was 7 years ago.
Yeah, it's hard to it's hard to understand exactly the time frame for Shatner. I mean, they show up and he's chopping wood and he looks really happy and he's got a dog and he's talking about Antonia, and he say something like, this time I'm going to do it right. I'm going to ask her to marry me and I'm not going to make the same mistakes. And it kind of dawns on him that he can kind of have all this if he wants. But Picard and Shatner actually engage in this conversation, and Picard actually convinces Shatner that he, in order to kind of, kill Soren and actually save, the galaxy or whatever it might be, that they actually have to go back to this particular point in time, which is on Viridian 3, just before the wave shows up and they need to attack Soren.
I must have jumped that 50 times. Scared the hell out of me each time. Except this time. Because it isn't real.
Antonia.
She isn't real either, is she? Nothing here is. Nothing here matters. Maybe this isn't about an empty house. Maybe it's about that empty chair on the bridge of the Enterprise. Ever since I left Starfleet, I haven't made a difference. Captain of the Enterprise.
That's right.
Close to retirement?
I'm not planning on it.
Let me tell you something. Don't. Don't let them promote you. Don't let them transfer you. Don't let them do anything that takes you off the bridge of that ship, because while you're there, you can make a difference.
Come back with me. Help me stop Soren. Make a difference again.
Who am I to argue with the captain of the Enterprise? What's the name of that planet? Viridian 3?
Yes.
I take it the odds are against us and the situation is grim.
You could say that.
You know, if Spock were here, he'd say that I was an irrational, illogical human being for taking on a mission like that. Sounds like fun.
Yeah, but it takes a bit of convincing, you know.
It does.
It's an odd sequence. It really is. Like with Kirk chopping wood there, and then Picard shows up, and then Kirk just like he's like, "Well, come in my house. Look, we're making eggs, and get me the spice." And
Yeah, that's right.
Toast, yes. And then it's not until they go off in the horse, and he makes this jump when Kirk says, you know, I've made that jump 1,000 times and it scared the hell out of me every time, but this time it didn't. This isn't real, and Tony's not real. Okay, I'll go with you.
Yeah. Just quickly before we go too far, do you think the whole Picard and Shatner thing's memorable, or do you think it's a bit flat?
I think it's a bit flat, really.
It should have been great, don't you think? Because it's like
Yeah.
two kind of all-time legends in the Star Trek world, and, you know, William Shatner and Patrick Stewart. I mean, two giants, Captain Kirk and Jean-Luc Picard. I mean, you don't get bigger than that in Star Trek. And it should have been totally epic. And it turned out to just to be this kind of like thing that's like a 10-minute part of the movie. And you're right, there's like Shatner chopping wood and cooking eggs and asking for spices and looking at his dog and all that kind of stuff. And it's fine. Like, it's not a bad sequence. It's just not all that memorable. And all the action at the end when they actually get out of the Nexus and arrive back at Viridian 3 is not really that well staged. It's all a bit clunky. The fighting is just a bit odd, and it just doesn't really kind of work all that well for me. What do you think?
Well, you know, honestly, I just don't think it's very original. I think this is really no different to an episode of TNG where they're trapped on the holodeck and it's doing weird things, or Q shows up and starts giving everyone shit.
Yeah, you're right.
You know, it's the same thing. So yeah, it lacked a bit of originality, and you're right, it just wasn't as epic as it could have been.
So to cut a long story short, what happens is, you're dead right, Kirk kind of on this bridge and there's like this overriding thing, and what happens is that there's like a like some kind of button on the other side that they need to kind of get to decloak the missile or something like that Soren has. I think Picard was going to do it, but Shatner goes, no, you go after Soren. I can do this. I've got this. Trust me. So Picard goes off to go up to the console to deal with the missile, and Shatner does this kind of jump through the air onto the very kind of unsturdy bridge, and when he gets over there, it actually kind of collapses.
He manages to decloak the missile, but then falls to his inevitable death.
Yeah, and you actually don't see him again until after the sequence, and they go back to Picard up on the console, who's having an argument with Soren, and he decloaks the missile, but he changes the direction of it, doesn't he?
He engages the clamps. So Soren manages to get up there and launch the missile, but since the clamps are down, it doesn't go anywhere, and then the whole thing just blows up in his face.
And he dies.
So they've saved the day. But of course, the Enterprise was still attacked by the Duras sisters, so they still crashed on the planet. But relatively speaking, everyone was fine.
Yeah, they were fine, except for Captain Kirk, that is. And then decides to give him a burial on Viridian 3 for some reason, which I thought was a bit strange, because Viridian 3 is not in the Nexus. It's very much in the real world. Like, there's no real reason why Picard couldn't have taken Shatner with him to give him like a all guns blazing kind of send-off.
Yeah, take him back to Iowa or something, where he was born or something, anything.
So I kind of thought that was a bit strange that they kind of didn't go down that path and give Captain Kirk a more fitting send off than being buried under a pile of stones on Viridian 3. Maybe they did. Maybe they went back and got him.
Yeah. And then, there is just a bit of a moment between Picard and Riker where they speculate on a new Enterprise.
Yeah, because don't they go digging for the Picard's book with all these family photos in it? They go looking for that, and they go, found it, and he goes, oh, thank God, thank you, Will, and all that kind of stuff. But you're right, the Enterprise D is gone now, isn't it? It's done. So you'll have to find out what happens in First Contact to see if there's a new Enterprise.
Recommend, not recommend?
I'd recommend it. I quite like the setup for this film. I really just think the last 20 minutes to 30 minutes kind of fell down a bit for me. As soon as Picard went down to Viridian 3 to confront Soren, the film kind of slowed down, and it just wasn't as interesting for me as the rest of the film. But I enjoyed all the character moments. I didn't mind all the Picard's brother passing away with Renee, and I liked the emotion ship, and I liked Geordie's kind of escapade. The only person that didn't have much to do in this film was Beverly Crusher. They didn't give her anything to do in this movie.
Yeah, it's a good point. And Troy had like the tiniest little bit to do.
Well, actually, they didn't. This is the first. They actually let Troy drive the Enterprise. There's a moment where I think Riker says, "Troy, get on the steering wheel," and she jumps on and she's piloting the Enterprise. It's the first time it's ever happened in the history of her character, anyway.
Well, another carryover. She wanted to be more than a counselor in the show, and they sort of set up that she was in training to do more.
So I mean, I would recommend this film. I think I just like watching the Next Generation crew. I love the show. I think Picard's fantastic. I like all the characters, so it's a bit of a home run for me to watch these characters on the big screen. So I'm probably going to like it anyway. If I had to give it a rating, I'd probably give it I'd probably say a warp 6.5.
Yeah, I might give it like a warp 7. Yeah, just round it out to a 7. It's definitely a recommend. It's a good movie.
Hey, a bit of housekeeping. We didn't give The Undiscovered Country a warp rating.
I noticed when I was doing the edits.
So if you had,
that would be lower than this one.
Yeah, I'd probably give. Going back to Undiscovered Country, I'd probably give that I think I liked it a bit more than you. Probably warp 7.5 for me.
Yeah, I'd say maybe like a warp 6.5.
That's where you're at?
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, moving on, we want to remind people that we do have a feedback section called our Civilian Vlog. So if you ever want to give us any feedback, if you're listening to the show, you're a fan of Star Trek, whatever, let us know what you're thinking about these movies. We love to hear from you guys, the listeners. It's the reason we do this. We love getting together and having conversations with each other, but we want to hear from you as well. So
definitely. So keep the feedback coming in. It's always appreciated when you do.
And of course, we are playing a little game on our social media, a little game of Who Said This.
This is a hard one, this one. I hope people have been watching the movie.
All right. Well, give me a count in.
All right, you ready? 3, 2, 1, scene.
I have an appointment with eternity, and I don't want to be late.
I could see the character in my eyes as you were saying that.
It's uncanny.
It is uncanny.
Yeah. So if you think you know who said that in Star Trek Generations, then hit us up on our social media. And if you're on Twitter, use the hashtag #RewatchQuote. It's just a bit of fun.
That's right. So for next week's episode, we're going to be watching Star Trek First Contact. So stay tuned for that. I can't imagine what's going to happen. Seriously, I have no idea.
Can't remember.
I'm joking. But yeah, I'm looking forward to next week, so it should be good. That's it for this episode of the Rewatch Podcast. Keep up with listener interaction by joining our Facebook page at facebook.com/Rewatch Podcast, and follow the show on Twitter at RewatchPod, and visit our webpage rewatchpodcast.podomatic.com.
And remember, you can always write us an email or record a voice message and send it over to the Rewatch Podcast at gmail.com. And if you've enjoyed the show, please consider giving us a rate and review on iTunes. Helps people find the show and builds up listener interaction, which, as I've said a million times before, we love to hear from you guys out there.
Exactly. So please keep it going. And if you're on iTunes, throw us a rating because it all helps.
Absolutely. Okay, looking forward to next week. Thank you again for joining me, Nathan.
Thank you, Cory.
I'll just say until next time, I hate this. It is revolting.
And if you excuse me, I have a date with eternity.
The Rewatch Podcast is not associated with the copyright holders of these films, and no copyright infringement is intended. The use of any and all copyrighted material is only for parody, news analysis, critique, or educational purposes as provided in Title 17, aka Fair Use. Music provided by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. Copyright 2015, The Rewatch Podcast.